Deeper than Mount Everest is tall, darker than any place on Earth's surface, and more restricted than almost any military facility in the world. The Mariana Trench sits at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, 11 kilometers beneath the surface, and it covers an area larger than the entire United States of America. We have sent humans to the moon 6 times. We have landed rovers on Mars. We have photographed galaxies 13 billion light years away. And yet less than 0.05% of the ocean floor has ever been directly observed by human eyes. The Mariana Trench, Earth's deepest point, has been visited by humans on exactly 4 occasions in all of recorded history. 4. And every single time someone's gone down there, they have come back with something they could not explain. In this documentary, we descend into the last truly forbidden zone on our planet. We will examine the science, the classified missions, the whistleblower testimonies, and the satellite anomalies that governments would prefer you never connect to one another. By the end, you will understand why the ocean is not simply unexplored. It is protected, the scale problem. To understand the Mariana Trench, you first have to understand how absurdly large and deep it is. Because until those numbers are in your mind, nothing else will make sense. The trench is located in the western Pacific Ocean, east of the Mariana Islands. It stretches approximately 2,550 kilometers in length and is roughly 69 kilometers wide. That is longer than the entire country of India from north to south. Within the trench sits its deepest known point, a location called the Challenger Deep. At 10,935 meters below sea level, it is the deepest place on Earth that we have confirmed. To put that in perspective, if you placed Mount Everest at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, its peak would still be more than 2,000 meters below the surface of the ocean. You would not even be able to see it from a ship above. The pressure at the Challenger Deep is approximately 1,086 bars, more than 1,000 times the atmospheric pressure we experience at sea level. This means that any object, any human, any vehicle, any structure descending to that depth must withstand a force equivalent to the weight of 50 commercial jet aircraft pressing down on every single square meter of its surface. The temperature down there hovers near 0 degrees Celsius. There is no sunlight. There is no photosynthesis. From a surface's perspective, it should be dead. It is not. The scale, what lies down there? The discovery of life in the Mariana Trench was, scientifically speaking, one of the most destabilizing events in the history of biology. For most of scientific history, it was assumed that life required sunlight, warmth, and moderate pressure to survive. The deep ocean was considered largely barren, a cold, dark desert. Then, in 1977, a research submersible exploring the Pacific Ocean floor near the Galapagos Rift discovered something nobody had predicted or planned for. In the complete absence of sunlight, at crushing depths, there were hydrothermal vents, cracks in the ocean floor from which superheated water, rich in chemical compounds, was pouring into the sea. And surrounding those vents was an entire ecosystem. Giant tube worms, some over 2 meters long, clams and mussels the size of dinner plates, shrimp with no eyes, crabs that seem to exist entirely outside the food chains we understood. None of these creatures depended on sunlight. They survived through a process called chemosynthesis, converting the chemical energy from the vents into biological fuel. An entirely separate method of sustaining life, operating completely in parallel with the photosynthesis that powers every ecosystem we had ever studied before. The implications were immediate and enormous. If life could thrive without sunlight, without warmth, and under crushing pressure, then the assumption that life required a narrow band of comfortable conditions had been wrong. Life was not fragile. Life was opportunistic, aggressive, and relentless. In the decades following that discovery, researchers found that the Mariana Trench specifically, despite being the most extreme environment on Earth, was packed with biological activity. In 2012, oceanographer Patty Fryer and her team found that the floor of the trench was covered in a thick layer of biological material, dead organisms, sediment, and organic compounds that had rained down from the surface for millions of years, settling at the bottom of the world. This created a concentrated nutrient layer unlike anywhere else in the ocean. Eating that layer, feeding on it, living within it, were amphipods, crustaceans related to shrimp that descended to the Challenger Deep in enormous swarms of thousands, individually small but collectively representing one of the densest biological communities at extreme depth anywhere on the planet. In 2023, a research team led by Dr. Alan Jameson deployed deep-sea landers near the Challenger Deep and captured footage that circulated globally. The cameras recorded something remarkable: a juvenile snailfish, Pseudoliparus belliavi, at a confirmed depth of 8,336 meters, the deepest fish ever recorded on camera. It was small, translucent, and moved with an almost delicate ease through the crushing black water. Scientists were astonished not just by the depth, but by the fish's behavior. It was not struggling. It was not barely alive. It was hunting. The pressure paradox. Here is where the science becomes genuinely strange, and where mainstream explanations begin to feel insufficient. Life at extreme depth faces what biologists call the pressure paradox. At the cellular level, the enzymes and proteins that allow organisms to function become rigid and non-functional under the pressures found in deep ocean trenches. A human cell at Challenger Deep depth would stop working entirely. The molecular machinery would simply freeze. And yet life exists down there in abundance. How? The answer involves a molecule called TMAO, trimethylamine N-oxide. Deep sea creatures, including those found in the Mariana Trench, produce increasingly large quantities of TMAO as depth increases. This molecule acts as a chemical counterbalance to pressure, preventing proteins from collapsing. It essentially allows cells to function under conditions that should destroy them. What makes this remarkable is that the concentration of TMAO in deep-sea fish increases linearly with depth, as if evolution had built a precise pressure gauge into their biology. The deeper the fish, the more TMAO in its cells. Every 100 meters down corresponds to a measurable increase in the compound. This is extraordinarily precise, not approximate, not rough, mathematically linear. Dr. Paul Yancey of Whitman College, who has studied this relationship for decades, described it as one of the clearest examples in all of nature of a single molecular adaptation corresponding directly to a single physical variable. But TMAO also has an upper limit. At approximately 8,500 meters of depth, the concentration of TMAO required to counterbalance pressure would exceed what any known cell can tolerate. The molecule itself becomes toxic above a certain level. This creates what scientists call a hard ceiling, a theoretical maximum depth at which fish can survive. And it sits around 8,200 to 8,500 meters. The Challenger Deep is at 10,935 meters. That gap, more than 2 kilometers of depth beyond what fish can theoretically survive, is where things get interesting. Because in that zone, below the fish ceiling, something is still moving. Hydrophones, underwater microphones, deployed in the trench have recorded sounds in that zone that do not match any cataloged biological or geological source. The sounds are not constant. They are intermittent, patterned in some instances, and cover a frequency range that overlaps with biological communication rather than geological activity. Official explanations range from equipment malfunction to unusual acoustic propagation caused by the trench's specific geometry. Both explanations have been challenged by the researchers who collected the data. Nobody has been down there to look. The Hadal Zone, the specific environment below approximately 6,000 meters of depth, has a name. The Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the ancient Greek realm of the dead. It comprises the deepest 45% of the ocean's maximum depth, but represents only about 1 to 2% of the total ocean floor area. The Hadal Zone is almost entirely contained within ocean trenches, of which there are approximately 37 major examples worldwide. The Mariana Trench is the largest and deepest. What makes the Hadal Zone scientifically extraordinary is its near-total isolation. Like the subglacial lakes of Antarctica, Hadal ecosystems have been cut off from the rest of the ocean for geological timescales. Species evolve in isolation. Nutrients cycle in closed systems. Evolutionary pressures operate completely differently. In 2019, a research team studying Hadal sediment samples from the Mariana Trench found something that stopped them cold. Embedded in the sediment were microplastic particles, fragments of plastic film, nylon fibers, and polyester. The samples were from the deepest point on Earth. No human had deposited them there directly. They had rained down through 11 kilometers of ocean from the surface above, carried by currents, sinking slowly over years. The finding was disturbing on multiple levels. First, because it demonstrated that human pollution had reached the most remote environment on the planet. But second, because it raised a question nobody had seriously asked before. If plastic particles had reached the bottom of the trench from the surface, what else might travel in the other direction? What currents move from the bottom of the trench upward toward the surface? And what might be using them? The historical layer, what explorers found. The four descents. As mentioned at the opening of this documentary, humans have descended to the Challenger Deep on exactly 4 occasions. What those missions found, and what was left out of public reports, tells a story that the official record only partially captures. The first descent happened on January 23, 1960. Swiss engineer Jacques Picard and United States Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh climbed aboard a vessel called the Trieste, a bathyscaphe, a free-diving, deep-sea craft, and began their descent. It took them nearly 5 hours to reach the bottom. Walsh and Picard expected the Challenger Deep to be a lifeless plain. Scientific consensus at the time was firm. No complex life could survive those pressures, that darkness, that cold. Instead, Picard reported seeing a flatfish, a creature resembling a sole or flounder, resting on the bottom sediment as the Trieste floodlights swept the floor. This was, in strictly scientific terms, impossible. Flatfish are not hadal organisms. They were not believed capable of surviving at those depths. The observation was noted in the mission logs and then, quietly, set aside. Subsequent analyses suggested Picard may have seen a large sea cucumber, a holothurian, that resembled a fish in the poor visibility of the murky bottom. Walsh, in later interviews, was never fully certain. He had seen something alive on the floor of the deepest place on Earth. He maintained that it moved like a fish. The record was never definitively corrected. For the next 52 years, no human returned to the Challenger Deep. That gap, 52 years between the first and second human descents to the deepest place on Earth, is one of the least discussed anomalies in the history of exploration. No official explanation has ever been given for why the world's most powerful navies and most well-funded research institutions collectively decided, for more than half a century, not to go back. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for next part.